Will we see 10% inflation in the official CPI number in the United States in the next 3 years, you think?
I think we will, unless they rig the numbers again. I mean, I wouldn't put it past them, but assuming they leave the CPI the way it is, probably we might see 10% next year.
Is inflation going to get worse in the coming year?
Well, it has to get worse. And in fact, and again, when you're talking about price increases, you're measuring the consequence of inflation. The inflation is the expansion of the money supply. And we know money supply is going to keep expanding. They're about to raise the debt ceiling, right? So we can keep going deeper into debt. You know, I always laugh whenever they talk about it. Janet Yellen, you know, when she testified the other day.
She said 6 times the government's going to be bankrupt this year.
No, but the funny thing is she said we have to raise the debt ceiling because it's important that we pay our bills in full on time. Well, if we paid our bills in full on time, we'd have no debt, right? The reason we have a debt is because we don't pay our bills at all. We borrow money so that we don't have to pay our bills. And what Janet Yellen really means is that we need to raise the debt ceiling because we can't pay our bills.
We can't pay our bills, so we have to take more debt.
We have to take on more debt.
Can I ask a serious question? And
yeah,
I'm scared to ask you this because I'm going to give you like all the ammunition in the world. If I am taking money from one investor or lender to pay back the original lender.
Ponzi scheme.
Well, there's 2 ways to look at it. It's called refinancing. People do it in mortgages all the time, right? It's also called a Ponzi scheme if they're investors that I'm not necessarily refinancing.
Yes.
I'm literally just playing like a
it is a Ponzi scheme. That's why Bernie Madoff said that the United States was running the world's biggest Ponzi scheme and that what he did was nothing compared to that. And I used to joke about it.
That was really his defense?
Because, but he just mentioned it. Like, hey, come on. I mean, like, he wasn't saying.
He said they do it so
you guys are running the same thing.
But this was the thing.
Did he really say that was really his defense?
Yes. And then the New York Times wrote this piece and they mentioned it and they said, well, you know, Bernie Madoff doesn't have any credibility, right? So, and I used to joke and say, wait a minute. He's got credibility on one thing.
Yeah, he knows
Ponzi schemes.
He knows all about Ponzi schemes.
Right. So if he says
he's
you're running a Ponzi scheme,
schemes.
yes, exactly. That's why I used to joke we should have made him Secretary of the Treasury. Because he understood the whole nature of what we were doing. You know,
that's pretty good.
Yeah, and you know, but the thing is, the government, Janet Yellen, when she tells everybody that if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we're going to default, that's an admission it's a Ponzi scheme. Right? Bernie Madoff would never be dumb enough to admit he was running a Ponzi scheme. Right? That's Ponzi 101. You keep it quiet. Right? You don't tell everybody it's a Ponzi scheme because they're not going to participate.
All right. So that's the debt. Let's go to Social Security. Because one of the things that I'm very interested in.
But before you do that, I forgot to finish answering the question as to why the inflation is going to be worse on a CPI. Look at producer prices.
Okay.
Producer prices, 2021, up more than consumer prices. So businesses were seeing their prices, costs rise more than what they passed on to their customers. Now, why was that? It's because a lot of businesses were reluctant to raise prices. They're worried about losing sales to competitors. And they were told that it's all transitory. Okay, we'll take a hit for a few months. It's transitory. We don't want to reprice everything and then have to change the prices. So businesses kind of absorbed the rising prices and took a hit in their margins. But I think by 2021 or 2022 rather, a lot of these businesses are going to throw in the towel and they're going to say, you know what, we got to pass this on. It's not temporary. And I think you're going to see businesses much more willing to raise prices in 2022 than they were in 2021. And
is this where you see corporate executives on their earnings calls being like, "Oh, we raised prices," and like the customers liked it? Like it was basically that's basically what people have said. They've been like, "Oh, we raised prices and the market accepted it," right?
Yeah, they're not saying they liked it. They're just saying they accepted our higher prices. They tolerated it.
And therefore now they feel emboldened to do more of it because they've seen like, hey, we did a little bit. We raised 3 or 4%. Nobody left. Actually, in some cases, demand's even higher. And so if we raise it 5 or 6% from here, then if nobody leaves, we can just continue to play this game.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to raise prices as much as they can. I mean, in general, businesses want to maximize profits. And so the reason you don't keep raising prices is eventually you lose sales. But if all of your competitors are facing the same cost problems that you have, when you raise prices, other people have to raise prices too. What ultimately happens, though, as you really start to raise prices significantly, it does impact demand because not everybody can afford the higher prices. And then what happens is businesses end up reducing capacity so they can achieve their profitability at a lower scale. And then prices really start to go up because now supply is coming down because fewer businesses are providing these products or services. And you really get the spiral. But what's driving it all is the money. It's more money being created. I mean, they keep talking about the supply side problems. And I was, just getting a kick out of Powell's testimony because
did you watch? Was that your Super Bowl? Were you sitting there and you had a beer and like some steak and a pizza?
I didn't have refreshments or anything, but I was watching. But Powell was like, well, because someone had said to him, well, what did you get wrong? Now that he's saying it's not transitory. And Powell said, well, we got one thing wrong, and that was this supply problem, the supply. And he said, but, in fairness, nobody could have predicted this. This was crazy. It came out of left field. Nobody could have realized that the effect of the pandemic would have been like supply chain bottlenecks. And I'm like, what is this guy serious? So you basically shut down the entire economy, right? All these factories close. You furlough all the workers. You literally stop making stuff. And now you're surprised that there's a shortage of stuff? You're not making it anymore. How could there not be a supply chain problem? I pointed it out on my podcast in March of 2020. As soon as this happened, I said, I don't know why people are talking about COVID as being deflationary. This is inflation on steroids, because not only are we flooding the world with money, we're stopping the production of goods. We're having less stuff and more money to buy it. This is like, double inflation. So this
shrinkflation and inflation.
Well, inflation is more money and chasing less stuff. Well, when factories shut down, they're not producing stuff.